I sat at my desk, drowning in paperwork, my signature in constant demand. The week had been exhausting, but I wasn't the type to complain. Structure kept me grounded, everything in its place, a rhythm that made sense. When something disrupted that rhythm, it had a way of gnawing at me. The house was quiet except for the hum of my desk lamp, and then her voice broke through. Soft, distinct, familiar. My wife was on the phone. At first, I barely registered the conversation. Just routine chatter, nothing out of the ordinary. But then she laughed. A light, genuine, unguarded laugh. It had been a while since I'd heard that kind of warmth from her, unrushed, unforced. It wasn't for me. That realization settled in my gut like a cold weight. Then, in the same easy tone, she said, "Everything will be ready on time." There was a pause. A small, almost imperceptible hesitation. Then she added, "Don't tell anyone, okay?" That last phrase stopped me mid-signature. My pen hovered over the page as I turned my head toward the living room, where she stood. She hung up the call before I could catch more. Something about the secrecy of it gnawed at me. I wasn't the jealous type, never had been, but those words stuck with me like a splinter buried too deep to ignore. I got up and walked into the room, my steps slow and deliberate. I wasn't the kind of man to storm in demanding answers. That wasn't my style. "Who was that?" I asked casually, as if I barely cared. She turned to face me with the same relaxed smile she always wore. "My sister," she said smoothly, without a single hitch in her voice. "We're planning a surprise for your birthday." She met my gaze evenly, her tone so natural that there was no reason to doubt her. If she was lying, there were no cracks in the performance. But her words still echoed in my mind. "Don't tell anyone, okay?" It felt out of place. Forced secrecy where there should have been none. That evening, something else caught my attention, something I should have noticed sooner. Her phone was always within arm's reach. That wasn't unusual in itself, but the way she handled it now seemed different. The moment she put it down, the screen locked instantly, going dark as if it held something that couldn't risk being seen. Later, when she stepped into the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of the screen lighting up. A message flashed briefly before disappearing. Just initials. R, then another message. D, then another. Short. Curt. Void of context. Not names, just initials, like a code meant to keep things hidden. I didn't react. Not yet. But I filed the details away in my mind. During dinner, I saw an opening. Keeping my tone light, I asked, "Who are R and D?" She blinked at me, just for a second, as if the question had thrown her off. But then she smiled, shaking her head. "Oh, just colleagues from work. We've got a big project going on. You know how much I hate mixing work with home life." Her answer was smooth. Too smooth. Before I could press further, she effortlessly shifted the conversation. "How's that deal of yours going?" Her voice was warm, her interest genuine, or at least, it seemed that way. I had always admired her ability to steer conversations. She was sharp like that. But tonight, it felt like a tactic rather than a natural response. The next morning, just as I was getting ready for work, she mentioned she had a meeting planned later in the day. "It's about organizing the party," she said, her tone casual, as if it were the most mundane thing in the world. I nodded. There was no reason to question her. Not yet. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't the kind of man who acted on impulse. I believed in facts, in logic, in methodical reasoning. And if there was something to uncover, I would do it my way, carefully, systematically, without jumping to conclusions. That evening, while walking past the living room, I noticed her purse left open on the chair. Something inside caught my eye. A slip of paper, slightly crumpled, peeking out just enough for me to see. A receipt. It wasn't from a coffee shop in the city center, the one she had mentioned earlier. No, this was from a high-end restaurant, one well outside of town. I picked it up, my fingers pressing into the thin paper. It was more than just a receipt. It was a piece of something larger, a small but undeniable fragment of a puzzle that hadn't yet come into focus. From that moment, I became more observant. I started paying attention to everything. Her patterns, her expressions, the way her fingers hovered over her phone just a second too long. She was good at maintaining appearances, at keeping things smooth, but I wasn't a man easily deceived. Every little thing mattered now. The scent of her perfume, subtly different from her usual choice. The way she answered questions just a beat too quickly. Alone, none of it meant anything. But together, they were forming a picture. One that demanded answers. I didn't jump to conclusions. That wasn't who I was. But I also wasn't blind. She thought she was being subtle, but I had spent too many years reading people to ignore the signs. The way she kept her phone close, the way her answers came just a little too quickly, the way she had that restaurant receipt from a place she never mentioned, it was all adding up to something. I just didn't know what yet. That night, as we sat in the living room, I tested the waters. "What was the name of that cafe you mentioned?" I asked casually, pretending to scroll through my phone. She barely hesitated. "Latit," she said with a small smile. It sounded believable. But something in her delivery felt rehearsed, like she had been preparing for that question. I didn't push. There was no need to. I was gathering pieces, not making accusations. As the days passed, my resolve solidified. I wasn't angry, not yet. If she was hiding something, I would find out. Not through emotions or baseless accusations, but with cold, hard facts. That was how I operated. Then came the dinner. We had plans to meet with my brother, Ryan. He was the kind of guy who disliked drama but wasn't great at keeping things to himself. I figured if anything was happening, he might let something slip. The evening started off normal. We talked about work, upcoming projects, the usual small talk. Then, as if testing the waters myself, I mentioned, "Emma's been planning some kind of surprise for my birthday." Ryan's expression shifted. It was quick, barely noticeable. A flicker of something across his face. Then a smirk, like he knew something I didn't. He lifted his beer and took a long sip, as if giving himself a second to think. "What's funny?" I asked, keeping my voice light. He shrugged, setting his bottle down. "Nothing. Just, relax, man. Everything's going according to plan." His tone was easygoing, but there was something off about it. Something that didn't sit right with me. I let it go. Sometimes silence revealed more than words ever could. But his reaction stayed with me, sticking in my mind like a splinter. I didn't push her on it, not yet. If I confronted her now, she'd just twist the narrative. She'd make me feel like I was overreacting, turn it into my paranoia instead of her secrecy. No, if I was going to get the truth, I had to be smarter. The next morning, I decided to test her story. If Lily had really sent that message, she'd confirm it, right? So, I sent her a casual text, asking if she wanted to grab a coffee. She agreed, completely unaware that I had a reason for meeting her beyond small talk. When we finally sat down, I kept the conversation light at first, talking about work, mutual friends, even a little gossip. Then I casually steered it toward my wife. "Emma said you were joking around in your texts the other day," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "She mentioned something funny you sent her about condoms?" I watched her closely. Her reaction was subtle, but it was there. A hesitation. A flicker of confusion. She covered it quickly, forcing a small laugh. "Oh yeah, that. Just a dumb joke. You know how I am." She was lying. She wasn't good at it, not like my wife was. I nodded like I believed her. But in my mind, the pieces were rearranging themselves into a new picture, one where my wife had dragged someone else into covering for her. Lily was nervous. Not haha this is awkward nervous, but I don't want to get involved nervous. And that meant she knew something. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch between us. She fidgeted with her coffee cup, avoiding my gaze. Then, she let something slip. "You'll understand everything at the party." I tilted my head slightly. "What do you mean?" She backtracked immediately. "Oh, nothing. Just, Emma's putting a lot into this, that's all. You'll see." That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just about a birthday party. Something bigger was happening. Something everyone else seemed to know about except me. I finished my coffee and left, my mind racing. I had always trusted my instincts, and right now, they were screaming at me. That evening, I came home earlier than expected. My wife's car wasn't in the driveway. She had said she'd be home all day. Busy with planning. Busy with errands. So where was she? I got back into my car and started driving, my hands tight around the wheel. I wasn't sure where I was going, but something told me I'd find my answer soon enough. And I did. Her car was parked outside a house I didn't recognize. I slowed down, staying at a distance, my heartbeat steady but my mind sharp. The house was ordinary, nothing suspicious from the outside. But what mattered wasn't the house, it was her being there. I pulled over a block away and waited. An hour passed. Then she walked out. She wasn't alone. A man followed her to the door. He was older, well-dressed, and comfortable, too comfortable. He leaned in close as he spoke to her, and she laughed. Not the forced, polite kind of laugh. The real kind. The same one that had caught my attention days ago. She took a folder from him, flipping through the papers inside like it was nothing. Then she hugged him. Not just a polite embrace. A lingering one. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't confront her. That wasn't my style. Instead, I drove home and waited. When she walked through the door later that evening, I was already sitting at my desk, pretending to be buried in work. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Meeting with a designer," she said smoothly. "I wanted to get some professional input on the party decorations." She was good. If I hadn't seen her with my own eyes, I might have believed her. Instead, I just nodded. She thought she was still in control. She had no idea that I was already 2 steps ahead of her. Later that night, I got my next confirmation. She went to take a shower, leaving her phone on the table. I never made a habit of checking her messages, but this wasn't about habit anymore. This was about finding the truth. As I passed by, the screen lit up. A new message. "Tomorrow is the big day. Make sure everything is ready." The sender. R again. It was time to stop waiting. It was time to act. I didn't sleep much that night. Lying beside her, I listened to the steady rhythm of her breathing, wondering how she could rest so peacefully when she was orchestrating whatever this was. I was past the point of giving her the benefit of the doubt. Too many pieces had fallen into place. The secret of calls. The locked phone. The initials. The condoms. The hug outside that house. And now, tomorrow is the big day. Big day for what? I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I knew. I was done sitting back, waiting for her to slip up. Tomorrow, I'd get my answers. The next morning, I acted normal. Played my role. Kissed her on the cheek, told her I had to stay late at work. She smiled, told me to hurry home. As soon as I left the house, I parked a few blocks away and waited. Sure enough, not even an hour later, she left. I followed her from a safe distance, keeping my car far enough back that she wouldn't notice. She drove across town, pulling into a small cafe. I waited. A few minutes later, another car pulled up. And out stepped my brother, Ryan. And then my cousin, Lisa. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. This wasn't just about her. More people were involved. The betrayal ran deeper than I thought. I walked into the cafe casually, choosing a table in the far corner. They hadn't noticed me yet. I wasn't about to announce my presence. Not until I heard what I needed to hear. Their voices were low, but I caught snippets of the conversation. "Everything's ready?" my wife asked. Ryan nodded. "He won't suspect a thing." Lisa smirked. "This is gonna be legendary. He'll never forget it." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. I needed to hear more. But I had heard enough. This wasn't a simple affair. This wasn't just her sneaking off with some guy behind my back. They were planning something. And whatever it was, it involved me. I left the cafe before they noticed me and drove home, my mind racing. I had played along long enough. Now, it was my turn to take control of the game. The day of my birthday arrived. The house was buzzing with energy. Decorations were up, guests were arriving, and my wife was playing the role of the perfect hostess. She moved through the crowd effortlessly, laughing, smiling, pretending like nothing was out of the ordinary. But I saw everything now. She thought she was still in control. She had no idea what was coming. As the evening went on, I watched her. Every movement, every interaction, every subtle glance exchanged between her and the people who had been at that cafe. Then, she raised her glass. "I want to give my husband a gift," she announced, smiling as she looked at me. "Something to bring excitement into our lives." I felt a pit form in my stomach. Something was coming. Something big. Then she said it. "I want to propose an open marriage." The room fell silent. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. An open marriage? I looked around the room, trying to gauge everyone's reactions. Some guests laughed nervously. Others exchanged awkward glances. But no one looked surprised. Because they already knew. I turned back to her, my hands tightening into fists. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice calm but cold. She didn't hesitate. Without a word, she reached under her dress and pulled down her underwear, throwing them onto the table. The room froze. Then chaos erupted. For a moment, the entire room was silent. Then, murmurs rippled through the crowd, nervous laughter, shocked gasps, whispered conversations. Some of the men in the room shifted uncomfortably, while others exchanged looks that made my stomach turn. And then, she took it a step further. She turned to my cousin, Ryan. My own brother. And he stood up, walking over to her without hesitation. His arm slid around her waist like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'll start with him," she said, smiling. "And then we'll see. Tonight, every man here is my gift." The words barely registered. My blood was pounding in my ears. I scanned the faces around me. Some guests looked uncomfortable. Some smirked. A few men were loosening their ties, as if they were considering it. This wasn't just a joke. This was planned, orchestrated, deliberate. And I was the only one who hadn't known. I don't remember standing up, but suddenly, I was on my feet. My hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Then, I flipped it. Glass shattered, plates crashed to the floor, and drinks spilled everywhere. The room fell into shocked silence again. My wife, or whatever she was to me now, staggered back, her expression flashing from amusement to anger. "Are you insane?" she shouted. "It's just a bit of fun. You're ruining everything." I could barely hear her over the roaring in my ears. Ruining everything. She had the audacity to say I was ruining something? I turned to Ryan first. Before he could react, I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him toward the door. He stumbled, caught off guard. "Get out," I said, my voice low, steady. He looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Dude, come on." I didn't let him finish. I shoved him again, harder this time, until he was forced to back up. Then I turned to the others. "All of you," I said. "Get the hell out of my house." Some of them hesitated. Others tried to reason with me, acting like I was the irrational one. But I wasn't asking. I was done. One by one, I forced them out. Pushed. Shoved. Threw their jackets and shoes after them, clearing the house of every last person who had taken part in this disgusting joke. Through it all, my wife stood in the middle of the chaos, watching me with an expression of disbelief. "You're embarrassing yourself," she spat. "You always have to be so serious. So uptight. You never know how to have fun." I turned to her slowly. "Fun?" She sneered. "Yes, fun. Something you clearly don't understand." I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a chilling calm. "I understand perfectly." Her smug expression faltered slightly. "You wanted to humiliate me," I continued. "You wanted to make a spectacle out of our marriage. Out of me." Her lips parted, but no words came out. "And now, you get to live with the consequences." I pulled out my phone. Scrolled through my contacts. Found the number I was looking for. I pressed call. My lawyer picked up after 2 rings. "Prepare the divorce papers," I said, my voice void of emotion. My wife's face drained of color. The last of the guests were gone. The house was silent except for the occasional crunch of broken glass under my shoes. Outside, I could still hear voices, angry, confused, lingering in the driveway. But I didn't care. I turned to my wife. No, not my wife anymore. Just a woman who had lost every ounce of my respect. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. "You're really doing this?" she asked, her voice quieter now. I didn't answer. I just opened the front door and pointed outside. "Leave," I said. For the first time that night, she hesitated. She had expected me to yell, to argue, to fight. She hadn't expected this. I could see the realization setting in. The weight of it. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then, perhaps for the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. Without another word, she grabbed her purse, stepped outside, and disappeared into the night. I didn't feel relief when she left. Not yet. Not while she and the rest of them were still walking around thinking they had won. I wasn't the kind of man to sit back and lick my wounds. I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. No. I was going to make them all pay. Starting with her. She had built her career carefully, taking pride in her spotless reputation. She had connections, influence, everything she thought made her untouchable. But I knew how to dismantle something carefully built. Through my lawyer, I started gathering evidence. I had the messages, the receipts, even recordings from security cameras in the house that she had forgotten existed. Proof of her behavior, of her reckless decisions, of the mess she had made of our marriage. Then, I sent it all to her employer. With just a few carefully worded emails and some well-placed implications, her career crumbled. She was fired within weeks. No company wanted to hire someone whose personal scandals were plastered across social circles. She had worked her way up, but now? She had nothing. And I wasn't done yet. Her parents were next. They had always defended her, even when she was clearly in the wrong. I had once let it slide, but now I knew the truth. They had known. They had known about her plans, her betrayal, her scheme to humiliate me, and they had supported it. They lived in a house that I had been paying for. A house they had taken for granted, never realizing that the mortgage was still in my name. So I stopped paying. Let the bank take it. They called me, pleading, demanding an explanation. I ignored them. Let them deal with the fallout of their choices. Let them feel what it was like to lose everything. Ryan came next. My brother. The one who had stood by her, who had smirked as she unveiled her twisted little plan. He owned a small business, something he had spent years bragging about at family gatherings. Through my contacts, I made sure it collapsed. I whispered the right words to the right people, pulled the right strings, and within months, his biggest clients dropped him. His business license came under scrutiny. Financial irregularities surfaced that he couldn't explain away. He was ruined. And I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. Because family doesn't betray family. And when they do, they suffer the consequences. And then there were the other men at the party. The ones who had laughed. Who had cheered her on. Who had been ready to join in. One of them was a former friend. He worked at a company where I was a major investor. I made sure he lost his job. Another owned a business that relied on government contracts. Through a well-placed tip, an investigation was opened. His license was revoked. One by one, I made sure that none of them walked away untouched. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. They had tried to make a fool out of me. They had tried to turn my life into a spectacle. Now, they were the ones losing everything. The divorce was swift and brutal. She tried to fight it. Tried to play the victim, painting me as a controlling husband who had sabotaged her career, who had ruined her life. But the evidence destroyed her lies. The judge took one look at the proof, her texts, the party, the witnesses who had been disgusted by what she had done, and ruled in my favor. She got nothing. No house. No car. Not a single cent from me. Instead, she owed me a financial settlement for emotional distress. It was more than just money. It was a reminder that she had lost. That she had tried to destroy me. And I had made sure she was the one left in ruins. A few weeks later, I packed my bags and left the city. The house wasn't a home anymore. It held too many ghosts, too many ugly memories. I moved somewhere quiet. Somewhere fresh. A small town where no one knew my name, where I could start over. No more betrayal. No more lies. Just me. Some nights, I sit on my porch with a glass of whiskey, staring out into the night, thinking back to everything. Not with anger, not with regret, but with clarity. Because now, I know exactly what people are capable of. Now, I know who I am. And I know that no one will ever make a fool out of me again. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.